So this week on the Stereo Image, we're lucky enough to have the great Judy Carmichael, the queen of stride piano, actually one of the greatest stride pianists to ever live. And we're so lucky to have her. I've been a fan for a long, long time, and lucky enough to know you over 20 years. And I want to just welcome you to the Stereo Image and thank you for coming on today. It's really
Oh,
exciting.
thank you. It's a great excuse for us to get together, which I'm really excited about, Mike. This is
Me
great.
too. Well, and I came to know you through well, you reached out to Penn to do him for your great show, Jazz Inspired, and we met in person. But I had heard of you besides your recordings. I through our mutual friend, the great late Bob Berkman from QRS.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and Bob was just a sweetheart, and really a champion of the music, and took over the mantle of 100-year-old company that made piano rolls,
I
uh, and
know.
and was just so he was so excited about it, and he was determined to keep it going, and
Mm.
and he just loved you and raved about you, and so when I got to meet you in person all those years ago, it was a real thrill for me. I was excited that you were having
Aw,
Penn on your show, and
I felt the
because they
same
said,
way.
well, Glenn said, "Who's this? Do you know somebody named Judy Carmichael? They want to have Penn on her show." I said, "Yes, do it, do it, do it." So,
I owe that to
and
you. I remember it
well,
was really, no, I really appreciate it.
Penn was not, I mean, really comfortable about, he was such a beginner,
Mhm.
in music, in jazz, and he was afraid that he would be woefully under-equipped, I think, to discuss anything with you. But he's such a pro that I don't think he understood. I think he thought you were going to sit him down and say, "Now on a minor seventh flat five chord, what do you like to play when you're
Yeah,
in your
no.
bass lines?" And
And no,
yeah,
I'm gonna jump in because I'm gonna tell you something. You're
sure,
bringing up a very interesting point because I have found that my most accomplished, meaning that they're not 20 years old, of the guests
right.
that I've had who are like Penn, who are profoundly accomplished with what they do, they're the most nervous because they have
Mhm.
such respect for people who know their stuff. And it was interesting because I had Roy Scheider on the show years ago, and
Okay.
I had met him at a party out here in the Hamptons where I live, and he lived very close by. And Ed Doctorow was one of my first guests. So we're
Uh-huh.
talking, 25 years ago. And Ed introduced me to Roy and said, "This is Judy Carmichael. She's got a new show. You should do it. I know you're a jazz fan," et cetera, et cetera.
Mhm.
And it took 5 years. I called him a couple, once a year, twice a
Sure,
year.
sure, you don't wanna
And then
pester 'em.
and finally we were going to the same physical therapist, hilarious. And he's sitting right next to me and with our ice packs on. And he turns to me and he said, "You're Judy Carmichael. I'm a big fan. I listened to your show." And I put my hand up. I said, "Talk to the hand. I've been after you for 5 years." And he said, "I was too intimidated. I was afraid that I wouldn't know enough." And it is flattering to them because from our years of doing this that the people who come up and pontificate about all they know about jazz are usually the ones that know nothing.
Right,
And then
right.
these people that are highly accomplished, either in jazz or in their own field, are very respectful. And I've a number of people I've had to say, "Look, that's not what the show is about. It's
Right.
about the jazz that you love, what inspires you, and that
Mhm.
kind of thing." So it's interesting that Penn was intimidated. You never told me that. That's really interesting to me.
Well, yeah, and I mean, she certainly never shared it with me, but I know Penn well enough to know
Right.
what was going on a little bit. I mean, he was just he was nervous. I mean, Penn has, how many in 50 years, how many things has he done? But, where he never gets worked up about doing anything except like if he's going to be, something out of his wheelhouse. And that's what another
Right.
thing is. This is all, now, of course, Penn's very comfortable, but it's just, I mean, one of the things I'm doing is, and my idea for this was to talk to people unlike you and me, but people that have music in their lives that aren't musicians. I mean, I'm going the rounds of the same people, with David Silverman and people. These were the people that, like, I thought, Bill Prady just took up the saxophone and he's 60 years old and he's got some stuff and thoughts on it that no one else has. And I want to talk to him. And talking to the people that I'm getting are not necessarily musicians, but music is a big part of their life. And it's really nice because everyone sort of has a story. And one of the things I like to ask everyone, and I'll ask you this too, is when did it dawn on you that music was more important to you than your friends? You know what I mean? When you're growing up and, because that was,
No, I just love that. I mean, it's such a funny, because as you were saying that and talking to people, that music is so important. I remember vividly when I had my first job in New York, and I was talking to a man who was an investment banker afterwards, and his passion for listening to music actually made me wonder if he liked music more than I did, because it was it meant so much to him in such a beautiful way. And I
right,
had worked so much of my life. I'd always liked music, but I was, when I was a kid, I was thinking I was going to grow up to be in a 1930s movie then, because I wanted to be
right,
Ginger Rogers. Then you get older and you
sure,
realize you can't be in a 1930s movie. And
right,
so I wasn't thinking I would have a career as a pianist. But looking back on it, I realized how passionate I was. And I think I would say the moment was when I heard that Count Basie record before he was Count Basie. And I think I've told you this before. It was when he was with the Bennie Moten Band, and it was Prince of Wales.
hmm
That was the track. And someone
right,
gave it to me. Now, I was playing ragtime professionally, but I wasn't going to be a piano player. This was like a college job. I thought I'd memorized a few ragtime things. I mean, my background was very different from yours. I had 2 years of terrible piano, not terrible, but not great piano lessons. So
uh-huh,
I had sort of thought, I'm not going to keep doing this. So I was playing and a guy gave me a tape and he said, I think you're really going to like this. I think you're okay
hmm
with ragtime. And I went insane and sat in a room and played that over. So then my friends didn't matter. Nothing mattered. You're right.
right.
I just sat in that room listening to that tape over and over.
Wow.
Didn't know, didn't know necessarily I didn't know keys. I was just starting to figure that out. So I had to pick out each note. It was
And this
hard.
was this you were in college?
Yeah, so I was like 20. I started
Yeah.
late to I got my first job when I
Wow,
was
that's
19.
amazing.
Yeah,
I just always assumed that you had started like 5 or 6 years old and,
nah.
and yeah, I did.
No, I played.
Uh-huh,
I took piano lessons, but I was
uh-huh,
afraid of this piano teacher. I didn't like her. Anytime I asked anything like, what is the circle of fifths? She'd
mhm.
say, I already taught you that. And then I was like, not asking again. And
Sure.
one of those stereotypic Germanic teachers. Anyway, so I
Mhm,
quit. And I didn't realize that I had a good feel for it and good time. People always
mhm.
liked when I played these memorized novelty pieces, like, Kitten on the Keys and Dizzy Fingers.
Right,
I could
sure.
do all that because I was a good reader. So I'd
Mhm,
memorize these things. But I knew how much I didn't know. So every time people
right,
went crazy for my playing when I was a kid, I think, they don't know that I don't even know what key I'm in. So,
right.
it was that kind of thing. So then I went in, played one tune, and got a job. Literally. I walked in,
Really?
I was playing on the guy, Newport Beach.
Mhm,
Someone told me there's this guy playing on a boat that does harbor cruises, cocktail cruises,
yep,
and he needed a sub, or he needed a Monday night on his off night, Monday and Tuesday night. So I
right,
played Maple Leaf Rag, and
right,
he said, that's a hard tune. I can't play it. I knew it was 4 flats. I didn't know it was A flat.
sure.
And
Oh, is that
so
what that is?
yes, exactly. I'll explain later, Mike. And so
Okay, thanks. And tell me
the
I wanna hear about this circle of fifths you're talking
Well,
about.
I know.
Yeah,
I'll tell you,
that's
it's really mysterious. Now I know about it. It's a secret. It's sort of Harry Potter stuff. I'll tell you later.
okay,
So
alright.
it's magic. So, but the best part of this is that this guy said, "Okay, I still remember it pays $25 a night. And I said, I've never worked for less than 50. Well, I've never had a job. You know?
Nice.
It was like already a negotiator. And he goes, okay, well, you're really good. Okay. And so he
Oh,
gave me the job. And he was never going to come back and hear me because I was playing on his off
right.
nights. So I knew
It
5
was his nights
tunes.
off.
I knew 5 tunes, and it was, I think, Bumble Boogie. They were all encores. Maple
Sure.
Leaf Ray, Kid on the Keys, Dizzy Fingers, Nola, and Bumble Boogie. Don't you love it?
Wow. Yeah,
Not a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
ballads.
That's $10 a tune.
It is. And I would, when a
Um,
musician would happen to be there, I'd say, what key am I in? And they'd tell me, and I'd say, how do you know? And then
yeah.
I remember that I was actually playing, then I started getting, some music, and I was playing 5'2", and I thought, oh, there's a pattern. Is this what that circle of fifths is? And the
Nice.
rest is history. So
History,
yeah, that.
exactly. Well,
Ah,
so you started on harbor cruises, um, and then I might be shooting myself in the foot here, but when did you like understanding like James P. Johnson and Lucky? I mean, when
all
did
the
you
stride
start?
guys.
And yeah. Did you start like buying their records and saying, I want to play like this all the time? Or did you just sort of naturally occur to you that, UB Blake is good, Fats Waller, I like him, I mean, did someone like lead you in that direction? Did you meet somebody in the business that sort of hipped you to this stuff, or did you just sort of happen upon it?
Well, it's such a good question because you and I know that it was very hard to access those things in those
Yeah,
days. You couldn't just type in who's like Art Tatum, on the
right,
internet or something. You had to have somebody tell you, and you hoped that there was somebody hip at a record store
right,
who knew what that
right.
was. So I
Hmm.
started with that Count Basie when he was Bill Basie. So I did
Hmm.
that, and then I'm thinking bit by bit, because this is long enough ago that there were people who remembered this music that would say, have you ever, old people my parents' age.
Okay. Yeah.
But a big person that I owe a lot to, that, I mean, there's a few people that I can really, and I'm sure you have it too, who play you something
Hmm.
and you go crazy. Um, One was, Howard Alden was getting started as a guitar player
Oh
then.
yeah. Yep.
And so he would come in, he played banjo then, and would sit in. And we were both so young that it was, I turned, I mean, ironically, I turned him on to Monk, and I think he turned me on to Art Tatum. It was like now it starts that
Really?
exchange.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's a guitar player named John Reynolds in LA
Mhm.
who was and is a great swing style guitarist. And he had a
Mhm.
huge record collection. And I owe a lot to him because he turned me on to all of that, whether it was piano players or the Boswell sisters or
Mhm.
James
Yeah,
P.
sure.
And then it just, because I knew no one who played stride. I mean, by the time I saw
Right.
somebody in person play it, I was already fully developed. I'd figured it out how to do it. And I thought, oh, that's how those guys do it, because we couldn't see films of those guys. But he played me a lot of things. And it was mainly that because it wasn't, I mean, the guys I met later, when I worked at Disneyland, which was
Right.
one of my early gigs too, but I was developing more. Then I was meeting people who were introducing me, to Charlie Parker. So it was a different
Right.
thing. I mean, there was a specific, I say John was the main one I remember who had this gigantic record collection and
Mhm.
really set me off because then I could go into a record store and say, who's like the Boswell sisters or who's like,
Right.
Fats Waller
Right.
and that. And then I got into all that stuff.
Now, yeah, I mean, uh, for m for me, I grew up with 2 player pianos in my house.
Oh, well, that's a
So,
huge advantage. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and of course, as a kid, I didn't understand that they were, they were multi-tracking the piano, you know
Right.
what I mean? I mean, it
Yeah.
never occurred to me, "Wait a minute, there's 12 keys going down. How can that happen?" You know?
So we
But
tried to do it.
yeah, so I thought, and I grew up with these great. I mean, some of them were actually Fats Waller. Some of them were, J. Lawrence Cook and these guys doing Fats Waller. And but I mean, I grew up with these weird songs like "My Cuties Do It 222 Today" by Pete Wendling,
Right.
and "Last Night on the Back Porch" and "Beat Me Daddy Ate to the Bar" and all these songs. And that's what I loved when I was, when I was 4 and 5 years old, and
Oh,
would
yeah.
would would try to, and the piano that we had downstairs had a pump. You pump the player,
Oh,
um,
that's so
and the
great.
and the one upstairs was a dual art reproducing player, which was a grand. And I had Gershwin playing Rhapsody in Blue, and so that was what but I didn't see a real stride piano player in person until I was, I must have been like 19. I did a gig in Buffalo for a guy that was from New York that was like a vice president at Gold Dome Bank. And there was a club in Buffalo called the Tralfamadore Cafe. And he hired his favorite musicians to play this club. And it was Gene Bertoncini and Michael Moore
Oh, man.
and Dick Wellstood and me. And I'm 19 years old, right?
Wow.
And and
Wow.
and I sat there and watched Dick Wellstood, and I was in tears. I couldn't believe that anybody was playing this much piano. And I
Yeah.
mean, I had seen Dave, and and I love Dave, and I mean, his whole concept was so it's what I wanted to do. But
Mhm.
just the power of, the power of Dick when he would, really turn it on. And I mean, it's certainly, and I love Dick Hyman, and nothing against Dick Hyman, but there's a little bit more authenticity to me to Wellstood's playing. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
You
And
just
and,
feel
and
that physicality behind it. You
yeah,
feel it.
yeah,
Yeah,
and
you
I
really
mean,
feel it.
that direct line from James P.
Yeah.
And so it just blew me away. And and I mean, I mean, I'm just going to say it anyways. I did the same thing when I heard you. You know what I mean? It's like
Oh, thank
you're
you.
authentic. You're the real shit. You know what I mean?
Oh,
And
thank
and
you.
and it's a lot of the stride people, as you know, they sound like teachers. They sound like they read it out of a book and they studied it, and they don't have that authentic, real feel of what it was. And you bring that
Mm.
to the genre, and it's really impressive. And I just wanted to get that out of the way because
That's so beautiful. I'm so, Mike, because I'm such a huge fan of yours. And for you to say that,
ah,
that's the most important thing. And I think that that's something that's very important for our listeners to know that
yeah,
that kind of thing only comes from tons of listening. And because there've been a
yeah,
couple people that early I kept wondering, why do those people sound like you said, like a teacher or something? Because I'd hear
right,
it. And then recently I asked one of these people that does this, but I mean, chops galore.
right,
But it hit me and I said, "Did you learn all this with transcriptions?" And they had. And I
sure,
never looked at a transcription. It was
no,
always listening and hearing that stuff you cannot write. You just cannot, no matter
right.
how accurately, I mean, you and I know,
You
but for
can't
our
notate it.
listeners, you
Yeah,
can't notate it because it's where you're kind of putting that feel and all of that
right.
stuff.
Well, it's amazing. When I was at Berkeley, everyone was transcribing everything, and
Right.
you get assignments. Transcribe this Bill Evans solo, and I specifically never tried to transcribe. I transcribed a lot of the Monty Alexander Montreux album because I
Ah,
just
that's
that
so
record
good.
changed my life. Yeah, but I never really transcribed a Dave McKenna solo. I just went and watched him play
Mm,
every night and tried to figure out
mm.
what he was doing. And same thing with Oscar. I transcribed, a couple of things for class. But it's funny because I saw a video not that long ago, maybe a year ago, of a incredible classical pianist. And luckily, I don't know who it is. Um, but she was, one of these. It wasn't the Yu Wang or who. It
Yeah.
wasn't this big star, but it was someone of that level. And as an encore, they played an Oscar Peterson thing like I forget what I don't know if it was CJ and Blues or Caravan or something, right? But it was note perfect and completely devoid of any idea of what she was playing. You know what I mean? I mean,
I know
and it's
exactly. And you
yeah,
can tell. You can tell just by
yeah,
listening because I mean, the first thing that I actually probably that I can remember of a melodic thing that I try to play it and for our listeners, when we say transcribe, we're talking about writing it down,
right,
writing it out. But we can transcribe by listening to something and trying to
right.
play something like that. And it was Lester Young's solo on Lady Be Good, that famous solo that it's
Oh,
just
sure.
so melodic and so.
Yeah,
I always say the interesting thing for me with great classical players is they, in my view, they should know it so well that it seems like it's improvised, like they're
ex
not reading it. And a great jazz chorus that sounds like, wow, that was written out before, in a way, not like the transcribed way, but
right.
it's so
No, no. It's
harmonically, melodically, beautifully structured. The great
right.
soloist that's how that one was. And I remember the moment that that hit me listening to that, I thought, I should try and play that solo. And I ran over to the
Right.
piano to do it,
Uh-huh,
but it's
uh-huh.
very different than writing it out. And
Oh,
that's
yeah.
you're the only person I know who can do the Dave McKenna thing with that basically you
Well,
attach a third hand on.
yeah, I mean, well, and it was funny because, I mean, for myself, I went over to the Copley Plaza. I called my dad and I said, a bunch of us are going over to see this piano player, Dave McKenna. He said, Dave McKenna's playing, and my dad knew him from Jimmy Ryan's, you know,
Oh, really?
'cause
Oh,
and
so
he
your
used to
dad
play.
was a jazz fan.
Yeah, well, again, that's why we had the player pianos and we had a good record collection. And I grew up with Teddy Wilson and so my dad knew, and I didn't know who Dave McKenna was. And we
Ah,
went over there and I went over there with a bunch of kids from Berkeley. I mean, we were all, I mean, first of all, going into the Copley Plaza as a Berkeley student, you had to wear a jacket. And I'm like this kid from South Buffalo, and I'm like, this is opulence beyond my wildest
no, I
dreams.
remember it was opulent. I remember.
Yeah, and, uh, and so Diana Krall was there. We were all going over there to see Dave. And, Ray Santisi, I don't know if you knew Ray,
Mm-mm.
teacher at Berkeley, a fine player. And we went in and I walked in and there's a guy playing T for two and he's changing keys every chorus and he's playing this shit that I have only heard on a player piano, but more.
Ah.
And I look over and he's got a freaking AM radio with a headphone in, with an earphone in his AM radio. He's listening to the Red Sox game while he's playing this stuff,
That's
right?
so Dave.
And this is probably like 1981, right? And at the time, Dave was still, as we say in the business, juicing a bit.
Yeah.
And so I didn't know any better. I just was, I mean, I heard that and it was like you hearing the Basie record.
Yeah.
It just changed everything. Cause I had been, I've been an Oscar fan, Herbie, Chick, all those guys that a 20-year-old kid listened to in 1980,
Right.
Bill Evans and Keith Jarrett and all those guys. And I liked it all, but I grew up with the player pianos and I still like Tatum and I still like Fats more than those guys and Oscar. And, because that was sort of my grounding, that was what I loved. But I could do all the Herbie stuff. I was learning it in school. But I walked into her Dave and I said, this is what I want to do. And of course,
Mm.
I ran up to him. I tell this story all the time, but I ran up to him, like an eager young space cadet. And I was like, oh, Mr. McKenna, do you give lessons? You know, because I didn't know any better. And he looked up from the piano, and Dave well. He looked up from the
Yeah.
piano, he goes, why don't you leave me the fuck alone? I'm just trying to make a living, you know? And and I it's so funny because,
Oh, God.
years later when we were dear friends, I told him that
Did you tell
story.
him?
And if
Oh.
Dave, he got this really hurt, he looked this really sad, apologetic look on his face. And he went, oh, oh, Mike, I'm so sorry, man. I was juicing pretty bad back then.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. And I said, Dave, it didn't have any effect on me. I was back the next night. you know? And, I mean, but he
Oh,
was genuinely, he goes, I
God.
did so much bad shit when I was drinking.
And
And,
he's so sweet. He
but
was such a big guy.
yeah.
And to with this huge heart, but like that big and I'm thinking you're making me think when I first met him, because I think I went I mean, I sort of met him at Copley Plaza, but I maybe when I was too shy, I just was so
Right.
gobsmacked by his playing,
Mhm.
it was just, oh,
Yeah.
how does he do it? And, but it was a place I want to say it was a great American Music Hall or something like that
Oh,
in,
yeah.
in
Yeah.
San
In San
Francisco. Is that
Francisco.
what it was
Yeah.
called? Yeah.
Yeah.
And, and I went up and it was some Concord thing, and I was out there doing
Right.
something for them. And I went up and I said, I'm a big fan. And he goes, oh, what's your name? And I said, Judy Carmichael. And I'll never forget it because, this big, big man, he goes, oh my God, Judy Carmichael, because you're left hand. He said, I can't do that. And he turned into kind of like this little boy, like he
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
fanboying me, this
Oh,
huge
yeah.
man. And I'd had a lot of those guys were not nice to me. So to
Oh,
have the great Dave McKenna,
right.
say that, he goes, I don't know how you
Well,
keep that left hand going all the time. And I'm telling you, I lived on that because as you know, with all
oh,
the
sure.
vagaries of our business, you can have 10
Right.
people pound you down and then one of your heroes says something nice and you think, okay, I
Right.
can keep going. And he was just so dear.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, he was, and devoid of any ego, although, his son said, Steve said to me, he said, I think dad knew how good he was,
He
but he
has
never,
to.
he just had this like working man's, one time he said to me, I don't know if, I don't want to lose this gig at the plaza, it's a good gig. And if this dries up, I don't know what'll happen. And I said, Dave, you're Dave McKenna. You can go out and play, on the road and make probably more money than you make at the plaza, but he was comfortable there,
Yeah.
and he said, well, what if the road dries up? And I said, the road's not going to dry up for Dave McKenna.
Yeah.
You've got how many albums out on Concord? And so anyways, but he was so humble and it was so, I mean, I've studied him for years, I mean, by knowing him and playing and trying to do, and the idea of accompanying yourself in that way that no one did before him. I mean, if you look back on the history of jazz piano, you can go from Teddy Wilson to Tatum to Oscar Peterson and see the line through there. But in the 50s, when Dave came up, there were like two guys that were completely off the charts with originality, and it was Errol Garner and Dave McKenna. They both just came up with a different concept,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and and he was never really appreciated, I don't think, for that idea. But I certainly it changed my life. It changed my life. I think for the better. But
Mm. Well, but
because
I think he could, I'm jumping, I'm interrupting, but I'm thinking, as you're saying this, I've always thought that the most successful people I've known, successful meaning in their life, not money,
right,
but they, and I even say it in master classes, I say, assess your talents accurately and go forth with courage. And that sounds
uh-huh,
simple, but with Dave, I don't know that he would have fully developed in this incredible way that we know him to have developed if he
hmm,
hadn't had those million hours of solo piano
yeah,
playing at the
right,
Copley, where everyone left him alone, where he could just
yep.
do what he wanted, do these amazing, in some ways
Oh,
hilarious, um,
oh, the medleys,
combinations
yeah,
of all the
yeah.
medleys, because you couldn't do that on a normal gig if you
No,
were out touring. You just couldn't.
no, no,
And I think he knew his personality and knew what he wanted. I mean, like you said, he said, "Leave me the fuck alone."
yeah,
Juiced or not, there was a part of him that was so pure in this music and the concept he was coming up with, I think, that I
right,
think he'd
right.
found his
Well,
spot.
he did. I mean, and again, I played the summers at the plaza when he would take off and do touring stuff. But I would get to watch him. I would go in on. I mean, I was working at the Ritz Carlton. I worked 7 to 11, and he worked 9 to 1. And I would go over every single night after my gig and sit there at the plaza. and have a Diet Coke or whatever I was drinking at the time, he would start, and I would hear him on a Monday night or a Tuesday night, and I would hear him play a song I hadn't heard him play before. Just say the second time around, right? Just an example of like, and the next night I'll hear him play it, and he's playing it a little, and I would hear him develop a whole thing on that over 5 nights. And
Yeah.
by Saturday night, it's a 7-minute showstopper. You know what I mean? And it was this really organic development that he could do. And I mean, the same thing, I'd sit there and he would do 50 minutes of songs with women's names in
Right.
the girls medley. And he would just start, and that would lead to The Girlfriend, the old song, The Girlfriend, and so I did a lot of that because I had a gig from 5 at night until 1 in the morning, solo
Yeah.
piano, 6 nights a week at the Bostonian Hotel.
Oh my
And
God. That's
I
like
would
my
do things,
Disneyland gig. They go on
yeah.
forever. Yeah.
And it was amazing because I got to do stuff like the stream of consciousness stuff, where you'd play, happiness is just a thing called Joe, glad to be unhappy, and that would lead you into like, laughing at life, I mean, just do all these songs and then the next set I'd say, well, I'm just going to play Cole Porter for an hour, or I'm just going to play Gershwin for an hour. And then, and Dave, you're right. I mean, he had 40 years of that kind of intense. I mean, I haven't done that in 25 years with Penn and Teller. I don't have a chance to, because I still love doing medleys. I don't get a chance to do it,
No,
but
and the way the gigs are now, we don't. I mean, I did that at Disneyland. I played forever. I did that 7
right.
hours a day. But I just did a gig in Switzerland, and it was interesting because they were really asking too much because I do a real show, and I did 11 shows
Yeah,
in 5 days.
that's
And so
insane.
it's insane. And especially, and the energy that I put out because I
Right.
also, tell
Oh
stories.
yeah.
I do a thing. I tried to speak some Swiss German. I
Yeah.
did a whole thing. But I will say I had one of the shows, and I told the guys afterwards, I said, I made more mistakes in this 75 minutes than I've ever made in my entire career. And I said that to a friend of mine, one of the guitar players, Nate Major, a great friend that I use a lot. And he said, good. He said, you're too clean. He said, that's good. And I knew at the time that, sometimes I can do that. And then I get uptight because then I start thinking too hard. You
Sure.
can't really think if you're playing stride, you crash and burn. But this, because there was so much playing,
Right.
I was cool, Mike. It was a real revelation for me. I'm telling you, I'm not being at all
Right.
disingenuous. I really made a lot of mistakes. I mean, just missing notes because I was
Oh,
trying to,
Jesus.
but I just went for it way more because I was trying
Right.
to do new things. And I must have done in those 5 days, I must have done 10 tunes I've never done. I'd never do that
Wow.
many new tunes. And because each
Right.
show was different and people
Sure.
would buy for the second set. And I'd think, oh
Wow.
God, can't we repeat some,
Yeah. Right.
so
Right.
my
Right.
brain can rest or something, right? Even
Sure.
my sidemen were exhausted, and
Wow.
all the
Well,
pressure's
yeah.
on us. But still, they were just like, it's a lot
I
of
mean,
shows.
that's exhausting. When I saw that you put it on Facebook, I couldn't believe 11 shows in 5 days. I mean,
No, it
you
was
know,
just, it was like a brain thing. But I'm coming to your thing with playing solo gigs that nobody appreciates except somebody who's done a lot of solo, is
mhm.
that I thought this is good. I'm going to remember this because I need to go for it more because what happens is I don't get to play with the same people in a row. I'll go play with
Right.
my English guys, then I'll do this. And so I'm always almost shrinking my repertoire to do the ones I know are going to work, that the
Right. Yeah.
guys
Yeah.
have heard because it's a concert, so you want it to go well.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
every tune, we can't just play tunes because people don't know standards the way they used to. Every tune has to earn its place. There has to be a reason it's there.
Mhm.
And those old days, those gigs we used to have, let us run through repertoire. And
Oh,
thank
yeah.
God we had it. I mean, we were lucky to
Yeah.
have it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you and I are, about the same age, and we both were lucky enough. I say this all the time in this show too, is we were lucky enough to sort of be the last generation to be exposed and play with the guys that invented this stuff. You
Right.
know what I mean?
No, I think it all the time.
Yeah, I mean, because everyone after us is experiencing it the way you would learn Bach. I say that all
Yeah.
the time too. But I mean, they're learning it from records, and they're learning it from sheet music, and they're not having, like, I mean, and I'm just fucking blowing myself here, but I got to play with Clark Terry, Jerry Mulligan, Phil
Yeah.
Woods,
Right.
Flip Phillips, all these guys, and in Boston, Herb Pomeroy and Dick Johnson, and that whole era of musicians that became famous and were great in the 1950s when jazz was the popular music of the day, 40s and
Right.
50s.
And it
And that's
changes
all
you. It changes your playing.
because I mean, Herb gave me so much. I took I took his line writing class at Berkeley. I took arranger for big band. I was in one of his ensembles at Berkeley, and it wasn't until I was playing 5 nights a week with him that he'd say, "Hey, Mikey, maybe you want to try doing this."
Yeah.
And it would like
It's
be life
different.
changing.
It
It's
is
like,
life changing.
and to have that up close and personal experience with someone who's been there and who's done it, it's a different, and we're lucky that way. I mean,
Oh, we're incredibly
in
lucky.
50
And
years from now, when we're both still doing gigs, you know,
exactly. No,
we'll,
I tell people they
yeah.
don't. I always compare it to dancing because I think people can relate with that more. That if most people aren't professional dancers, but if a professional dancer takes you in their arms, you are going to
Hmm.
move differently and you're going to feel it because they're holding you, they're making you move in a better way. And
Right.
with jazz, especially, but also in all music, but with jazz, I mean, there's a great bass player, Dave Green, who played in England, and he played with everybody. So
Mhm.
whenever Coleman Hawkins, when all the famous people came over, it was
Right.
Dave Green. So Scott Hamilton and I are always fighting over Dave Green. I'll call Dave and he goes, "Oh no, I'm working with Scott." I said, "Oh, I didn't,"
Got you.
who's there to share the bass player.
Yeah.
But I played with Dave and years ago, and it was so powerful, and the groove was so deep. And I have a
Hmm.
pretty deep groove anyway, but this
Sure.
took me to like the Grand Canyon. And
Wow.
I thought, I mean, it was really I told him it swung so hard I almost hurt myself. And after the gig, and I thought, well,
Yeah.
that'll never happen again until I play with Dave. And then I came
Right.
home and did a gig with my trio here, and they all, to a man, said, "What happened to you?" They said they're swinging so much harder. I said, "Dave Green happened to me." And they were all like, "Yep, yep, that's what
Oh,
it is."
wow.
And so
Yeah.
think how powerful to play with somebody once and have
Right.
like this, because I
Right.
knew what it felt like. I now had gone, to the mountain, and I knew how to
Well,
find my way back.
yeah, it was the same thing playing with when I got to play with Ray Brown. You
Oh,
know,
yeah.
it's like, I mean, there's some great bass players in Boston. I'm sure Marshall Wood.
Yep.
Um, and there was this guy named Whit Brown who's a great bass player in Boston. And there's a lot of great bass players. I had never been exposed to that, to the sound, I mean, heard him with Oscar a million times, and I heard a million records, but to sit next to that instrument and have that go through you, you
It's
know,
different.
and it's a high you chase forever.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a kid that I'm a kid. I mean, youngster because everybody's younger than me now. Um,
I feel that way too.
there's two guys in LA right now, and a fantastic woman. And I'm gonna just give them shameless promotion now, but
You
there's
should.
there's a guy named Mike Garola, and I don't know if you know that name, but
It
Mike
sounds familiar,
Garola,
yeah.
he's well, I did a record with Jeff Hamilton and him, and
Mhm.
it was supposed to be Jeff and John Clayton, and John got a gig he couldn't turn down, so he sent in this kid Mike Garola, and at the time he was 19, and we did the session in 2 hours, had a whole CD. I mean, he
Yikes.
knew every tune, he played his ass off, and he swung. Then I did a record with Katie Thoreau,
Mm.
who is again of that same Ray Brown school,
Yep.
and through John Clayton. And I hooked up with this guy, Alex Frank. I don't know if you know Alex,
I don't.
but Alex is the bass player for Jeff Goldblum's band. He runs
Oh,
Jeff Goldblum's
then
band.
I've heard him. Yeah, yeah,
He's
yeah.
Yeah, and he's the same thing in terms of Ray to John Clayton to that. And that's all I'm looking for in a bass player is the big fat beat. You know what I mean?
Oh,
That
of course.
is I know plenty of virtuosic bass players that don't have it, that don't get in the middle
No,
of the groove and
no, it's a
just
different
lay it
thing.
down.
And to have that
Yeah.
sound. Yeah, I had a funny thing, just a little funny aside. I played with somebody that was recommended. I can't use any names because everybody knows everybody, but we'll just
Uh-huh.
say that he's a teacher type, works at a university, plays a million notes, knows all this. And I don't get to play
Uh-huh.
with bass that often.
Right.
But this was
You don't need
the,
it.
and this was this it required bass. So
Uh-huh.
I hired this guy on a recommendation of someone we both admire. And it was someone, it was a big festival, and there was a
Mhm.
whole tour. And I couldn't, it was awful. I just couldn't make it
Uh-huh.
happen. And so I asked my guitar player and my drummer, I said, listen, you guys play with lots of people more than I do. What am I supposed to do to make this
Uh-huh.
work? I can't make this work. He's killing the vibe.
Right.
And they didn't know. And I actually, in fact, it's on YouTube. People could find it, but they wouldn't know if they were that this is what was happening. I just kept it goes on and on where I say lay out, and I take another chorus. Lay out. I take another chorus. Just my guitar and me. Lay out. Then I'm like tacit. Yeah, I'm just changing
Well,
what I'm
no, it's
saying.
funny, yeah.
It
I mean
was so hilarious because it goes on and the audience goes berserk. They're absolutely going berserk because they think it winds up being this big, you know,
Sure.
dramatic thing. But it was just me saying, I've got to get,
I gotta
I
get
had
there.
to,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No,
I
I've
got to
had
get
it.
this out of my head.
It's so funny because I've played with a lot of bass players over the years. I prefer, I like playing solo,
Well,
but
and you're great solo, but
but
it's nice to have a
uh
great bass player.
yeah, and so I've worked with a lot of great guys, but I will tell you I've gotten spoiled too because the past 2 decades where I've just worked basically for Penn and Teller.
Mhm.
Um Which is, and it's been great listening to Penn turn into a good bass player,
Yeah.
because there were some white knuckle times in the early days but now, and especially what happened was he never had time to practice because
Yeah.
he's so busy. And during the pandemic, he practiced an hour a day every day and turned into a
Oh.
good bass player.
Oh, well, that
And then he
changed
bought a
everything.
gorgeous bass that was owned by Dave Stone, who
No,
was an
yeah.
LA.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he bought one of his basses when he passed away, and it's a magnificent instrument. And so Penn is playing great. So it's no chore to play with him every night. But I've played with, like I said, I played 5 nights a week with Marshall Wood in Boston. I played with John Lockwood. I played with Whit Brown. I played with all the heavies guys in Boston and a lot of guys in New York and in Keeter and I've been lucky to play with great bass players. And so I got spoiled. And I was playing Chicago, and there was a great bass player in Chicago named Kelly Sill, who
Oh, I know
passed
this
away a
name.
couple
Yeah,
of years
yeah,
ago.
yeah. Uh-huh.
I worked
Uh-huh.
with him for 15 years because I've been playing the mill for longer than I've been with Penn and Teller.
Oh,
And
right. No, I do know that. Right. Yep.
and so he was my guy. Him and a great drummer named Eric Monska, who was Patricia Barber's drummer.
Mm.
And they get it. They get that I'm trying to do Oscar at the London House every time I go to Chicago. You know what I mean? That's the vibe I want,
Well,
you
they've
know?
gotta know. I mean, it's like they've gotta have and they've gotta really love this music that we love
Yeah.
because,
But
you're
but the
going
thing
back.
is, there was another guy. There was a couple other guys in Boston. There's a guy named Larry Kohut, and there's a lot of great players. But anyway, so this is the point of this story that I'm going on and on about is I got spoiled, and I thought, well, there's great bass players everywhere. And I was doing a gig in a city that shall not be named, in a state that you live in, but I don't wanna cast aspersions, but I'm doing this gig, I get called for this gig, and they say, "Well, we'll get this bass player from a world famous music college in the center of New York State, not quite the center, a little bit left to the center of New York State. You know, because if you look at Syracuse as the center and you keep going west a bit, there's a school there where they also made film. They made film there, you know. But I don't want to say the name of it.
Oh my God.
This guy showed up for the gig, right? This guy shows up
Oh.
for a gig with me, and he says, "Ah, before the gig, I knew I was in trouble because he says, "Oh, this is great. I haven't touched the upright in a couple of years."
Oh. Oh. Oh.
And it went as well as you can expect.
Oh,
The
man.
first tune, he didn't know the bridge, and he's fumbling around. And I said, "Here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna pay you, and you're gonna drive back to
Get
that
out of
town
here.
and
Yeah.
get yourself some film. Um, I'm gonna just pay you for the night, and I would like you to leave." And he played the first song, and that was it. And I played the rest with my left hand I mean, because as you say, if the vibe isn't there, or
There's nothing you can do.
if there's nothing, you know, so layout is the right advice at that point, you know, because you know it's not going to get any better. Um,
Oh my God.
and
It's so funny to think about that, though. I mean, the things that
Yeah,
now the
God,
people don't
I'm going to
realize.
look that up on YouTube, by the way.
Oh my God. Well,
Um,
for you, I'll send the link because it
okay,
was
thank you.
really, it
Yeah, I
was
won't
really
share
funny.
it, but
Well, because it's just like there's no, I remember different times. Well, my first jazz festival actually was the Concord Jazz Festival. And I really didn't know and Ray Brown was my bass player. And I did not know what to do with the bass player. I had Jake Hanna
right,
was my drummer, Ray was my bass
sure.
player.
Oh,
And I was so nervous because you remember that's the day, maybe it still happens, when a drummer might take a solo and not keep track of the time. And I
right,
was so new, I had no idea when to come in. And bass
right.
players sometimes did it too. And I
Oh
thought,
yeah,
oh man, I'm not going to be, and if they weren't melodic, you had no idea. And so I was
yeah,
very, very nervous. So I don't think I did great. I did okay. But then Jake, bless him, and this is one of the generous people, Jake
right.
said, play a solo because he knew I wasn't really showing what I could do. I was so young. I was scared to death.
Hmm.
It was my first jazz festival. And I'll never forget that because I mean, and there's playing with great musicians where it was appropriate for me to do something on my own because I could
Right.
just do it and the audience went nuts and Jake knew they
Yeah.
would as I stumbled around. But but yeah, there's a time when you just have to say lay out. That
Yeah.
is the message of this
It,
conversation.
it really is. It is. You know, it's but
In
it's
life,
true.
in life, and in
In
music,
life,
there's a time
yes,
when you just say lay
yeah, you
out.
just say
I had a
layout.
funny
You
thing.
know,
I'll tell you something, just one thing, because I
sure.
know we've talked forever. We're gonna run out of time.
Mm,
But I'll tell you something. When I started and there weren't any women around that I ever saw, there were, singers, but there weren't any instrumentalists. That our whole thing about laying out, it was very hard for me to say that because I've been brought up in
oof,
that generation of don't be that direct, don't be bossy, don't this.
right.
And the first time I said it to a band, and I was like, "Psst, guys, I'm going to take a chorus. This one's for me." And I put my hand up and I do a little thing. And then finally, afterwards, one of the musicians said, "Judy, just saying lay out, you're confusing the band." And it was
Right.
just way too much for me
Uh-huh.
to do
Uh-huh.
that. And there were a lot of things like that, I mean, now I've had people tell me that they're in school and they tell them how to run a band, how to stand on stage,
Yeah.
which I think that can be too much too. Because I had one person who said, they said, that's not how a jazz musician acts. And I thought, now we're going too far,
Yeah. Yeah.
to
Yeah.
let
Yeah.
them develop. But for me, I, it was interesting throughout my the first, yeah, well, the early careers that it was so much about being a woman. Every single article talked
That's what
about
I want. Yeah. Of course. Of
everything
course.
was
Yeah.
that. And it was even Phil Schaap, bless him. Some of your listeners won't know, but he was a very famous radio person. And
Sure.
first person did liner notes, did up produced, first person to interview me in New York. And he wrote some liner notes for me. And it was so cute because he went into a whole thing about how All anybody talked about is that I was a woman and that they shouldn't talk about that. They should talk about my music. But he'd wound up talking about the fact that I
Talking
was a
about the
woman,
fact that you were a
you know,
woman. Sure,
did it too.
sure.
Um,
Yeah.
and so people would always say, well, what women have influenced you? And there weren't
Uh-huh.
any women. I never minded that there weren't women models, and I
Right.
just was forging ahead, and people would say, well, the men, they wanted me to not like men, but I'd had some
Yes.
great men that protected me, stuck up for me. I had a lot of bad treatment too, but
Yeah, I
which I think every woman goes through,
mhm.
especially in that era, but even
For
now.
that
I
era,
mean,
yeah.
yeah, but I keep thinking it's better, and now I'm talking to women now, and so much isn't better, although they have no
Wow.
idea what it used to be like, but,
Mhm.
but yeah, I just sort of forged
Well
ahead, and I.